I am Claire Mitchell, Doctor of Laws and King's Counsel.
And I am Zoe Venditozzi, Doctor of Laws, teacher and writer.
On the 8th of March 2020, International Women's Day, we launched the feminist Witches of Scotland campaign. The Witchcraft Act, in force between 1563 and 1736, saw thousands of people, mostly women, accused and executed as witches in Scotland, in the country's biggest and most brutal miscarriage of justice. Our campaign had three aims: to get a formal state apology for those accused of witchcraft, to obtain a pardon for all those convicted, and to get a national memorial to remember those involved in the Witchcraft Act.
On International Women's Day 2022, the first of our aims was realised when First Minister Nicola Sturgeon issued a formal state apology to those accused as witches. The first formal state apology ever. We are currently working with politicians to ensure there is legislation passed to pardon those accused as witches, to change their status from convicted witches to those who ought never to have been prosecuted. We continue our work to obtain a national monument so those who suffered will never be forgotten. Join us as we speak to the experts on the witchcraft trials, both here in Scotland and further abroad, as we explore the history of women in Scotland and continue the cultural conversation of what it means to be a woman. Hello and welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. Quite ridiculously, we are now into, I think, our third year, and dun dun dun, this is the 65th episode of 6, Claire.
No, I know.
65. I mean, we should retire at this age.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, I think it's 67 now, actually, probably.
I'll never get to retire because I'm very young, obviously, but I'll never be able to retire. I'm just letting you know that. Any rich people out there that would like to be our patrons.
That you're just going to keep going and going with work.
You don't have to until I just die.
Okay, well, that's a cheery start to the year for the listeners.
Sorry, listeners. So, Claire, it's 2023, baby. How's the year been treating you so far?
It's been good so far. There's only been a teeny bit of it, so I've not had much to go on, but that bit has been so good because at the start of this year, did we or did we not meet with Filofaxes, Zoe?
We did. We are such classy 1980s boss bitches.
We are.
That. We met up with our Filofaxes. Claire very kindly gifted me a Filofax, and we sat down and we had a planning meeting, which we do occasionally. I know it maybe doesn't seem like it to our listeners, but we do occasionally meet and work out what we're going to do going forward. Whether we follow the plan or not, sometimes is.
It's always nice to kind of have a plan, even if nothing goes to plan in that plan. At least you can always say this was the plan.
Yes, because as any good teacher will tell you, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Oh my God. Is this the standard? Is this the standard of chat that we're going to bring to listeners in 2023?
We've kicked off talking about Filofaxes, so I'm not really sure we're right at the forefront of sort of cutting edge.
I'm totally just ready to take over Wall Street at this stage with my luminous pink Filofax.
Yeah, I need to get a skirt suit.
A skirt suit with padded shoulders, for sure.
And sport shoes, court heels.
Oh, I thought you said sports shoes, but they did wear sports shoes as well.
They did, to get to work, and then they changed into their high heels, didn't they?
You have watched Working Girl the same as me.
I have also watched Baby Boom. It's one of my favourite films. Sam Shepard's in it. It's Diane Keaton. She sort of inherits a baby from her deceased, is it her sister or brother, something like that? Somebody dies, and then she has to take on the baby. Oh my God, it's so satisfying. She moves to this small town in somewhere like Connecticut. She starts making applesauce, which inexplicably Americans seem to feed their babies by the gallon. I never really fed mine unless I was in America with applesauce. But anyway, she bottles like jars applesauce, makes an amazing business with that.
Of course she does.
This beautiful big farmhouse, and then falls in love with Sam Shepard, who's the vet. And he's just at like peak lovely Sam Shepardiness. And it's just really satisfying, lovely. And Diane Keaton's so not your standard romantic kind of character as well. And I just loved it. I must have watched that when I was about 13 or 14 or something like that.
I thought you were going to say 30.
No, it was too late by then. I'd already spawned my own children and I had not fallen in love with Sam Shepard, sadly.
No.
But also Sam Shepard's now dead, so it wouldn't have worked out brilliantly anyway.
Again, let's try and maintain a positive aspect to 2023, Zoe.
Yes. I mean, he was older. He wasn't in the first blush of youth. let's move on. So we achieved a lot in the last couple of years, particularly in the last year. And I think you're going to tell us some stuff.
Well, I could tell you some stuff. What did we do in the last year? I suppose the absolute highlight must be on International Women's Day 2022, when you and I went down. We went down to the Parliament, but we couldn't actually get into the Parliament because of COVID restrictions. But
and also I'm barred.
She's not barred.
Not barred.
She's not. But if she was barred, it would be for raccoon-related activities. We went down to outside the Parliament, just us, not raccoons, and we were actually with a BBC4 radio crew.
Yeah. And with Dana Garibelli.
Yeah, with Dana Garibelli, and
Scottish journalist.
She and one of her colleagues did a really good Radio 4 show called The Witches' Pardon, which you should have a listen to, because there's us live when we hear the First Minister on International Women's Day giving the first formal state acknowledgement and apology to those people killed as witches. It was really emotional. I wanted it to happen, but I was just really, really surprised at how emotional I got when it happened. I'm not really one given to outbreaks of emotion, Zoe.
That's good. You're a tough 80s broad.
With my Filofax.
Yeah. But it was really cool, and definitely worth going and finding that podcast if you've not listened to it yet. I imagine it's on BBC Sounds.
Yeah, BBC Sounds is still on it.
Yeah,
The Witches' Pardon. And speaking of the Witches' Pardon, the other thing that we've been doing is working to try and obtain the pardon as part number 2 of our campaign aims. And we have been in communication with Natalie Dawn, who's the MSP who has brought forward the proposed legislation. And there has been a public consultation, which we've been sharing far and wide, asking people to respond to. And we're really pleased that various different bodies have responded to it, individuals have responded to it, and we are looking forward really soon, we hope, to the outcome of that. So we get to see how many people are in support of it, how many people aren't in support of it, and we get to analyse what the outcome of that public consultation process was. So if the public consultation process was broadly positive, then we can move forward to the next part of the consultative process, which is seeing whether or not we can find cross-party support to bring the bill forward. Now, in an ideal world, Zoe, I would really love for the bill to be brought forward within a very short period of time and have International Women's Day 2023 be the time that we could have this legislation passed. But I suspect that even with the best will in the world, that is far, far too short a period of time, because we're already in the first week of January, and sadly, 8th of March is not that far away.
Yeah. But still, let's hope and maybe it'll happen. We should manifest it.
Are you into manifesting this year?
Day. No, I'm not sure I'm into manifesting, but I don't think it hurts.
No, positive mental attitude, Zoe. Yeah, we can just keep it in our 80s vibe. That would be like positive mental attitude.
Instead of PMS. And then that brings us on to the next thing, which is the National Memorial.
Yeah, so we are still working with various groups who have expressed interest in the National Memorial. The Scottish Government wrote back to the Public Petitions Committee saying that it would support us in promoting the idea of a national memorial to see if we could get assistance with it. So, as you know, Zoe, very sadly, there are a number of places in Scotland which can lay claim to having a connection with the witchcraft trials, which would mean that it could be a place properly where we could remember people and have a national memorial. So we are still working with those bodies, and we will keep you updated insofar as we can to find out what happens. As Zoe says, we don't actually want to build the memorial ourselves. We just want to find the right place and the right people to do that.
Yeah, because I still really feel that it's very important that there's something that is national, that there is something that draws together all these fantastic sort of projects and examples of work that people have done, you know, not just recently, but there's obviously been, as we've talked about, several things recently that are amazing to see, but also things that have existed for a long time, like the Maggie Wall sort of area, that memorial, and other areas too, that I would like to see it all kind of brought together in one place and done to a really high standard. You know, I really want it to be something that is seen internationally as being, you know, forward thinking and unusual and quite provocative, and, you know, that people will come and look at it and won't necessarily know what it is they're looking at, and then they'll find out what it is, and then that opens up a whole another avenue to get people involved in and knowing our history. So I'm hopeful one of these different sort of areas that we're looking into will bear fruit, and then it's just a matter of, I suppose, getting money.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the big thing, isn't it? Getting money at the moment is difficult. I mean, we're in a financially very, very difficult time. And I totally understand that money, if it's available, should go to helping people here and now. Whilst I absolutely think that there's an important need for memorialisation, and it's something that definitely needs to happen, it should only be for money that's set aside for these type of things. I'm not for it
definitely
diverted from anywhere.
But I do think, maybe slightly provocatively saying this, that they're even at the height of poverty, which, by the way, we don't need to be in that state if things were being run properly, but I'll not open that whole can of worms. But there should always be money for the arts and for the history, because we need to have our identity in order to be the forward-thinking country that we think we are. So for those people that, you know, that would say, we don't have the money to spend on things like that just now, like, I get it, I do get it, but there's always money, and there's money that gets spent on things that aren't really that useful. So I would really hope that we can find the money, or whoever takes it forward can find the money from somewhere.
No, absolutely. As you say, there are pots of money set aside for various things. And of those pots of money, then I think a national memorial for those killed as witches has as good, if not better, a claim as many different things. The thing is that it would also be something which would encourage people to come and visit it. It would encourage tourism, and tourism would encourage, you know, spending and that sort of thing. So in a practical sense, that it might actually generate money too. Not that would be the aim of it, but I think that would be very possible. Throughout the course of the last year, we have continued what someone described very nicely as the cultural conversation about women's history in Scotland. And it's been very, very well received. We continue to talk a lot, both at home and abroad, about the witchcraft campaign. I think lastly, just before Christmas there, we had a long piece in Le Monde, Zoe.
Yep, indeed, yes. So we were interviewed by Le Monde along with some other people in Scotland, which was really great to see. So people like Judith Langland Scott, who talked about her research that her and Sean have been doing in Forfar. And there was lots of good background about that. So we've had good interest from France for a few other things in the past. So it was really nice to have that in Le Monde, because to me, and this is maybe quite a filmic way of thinking about it, to me, Le Monde is like the big French newspaper. It maybe isn't, but in my mind it is. So it seemed like that was a really important sort of point to get in there. So that was really cool. And also, like, there's a kind of a ripple effect from things with the podcast. So, you know, there have been other books that have come out this year. So like Mary Kidd's book, We're All Witches, she name checks in the book that our campaign was a big part of that, bringing that to the forefront. And of course, we name check Mary Kidd and saying that her earlier books are partly what helped us with our podcast. And then we've got Heel and Harrow. They won awards for their fantastic work on the music that was tied with stories of witches, both factual and also fictionalized, that Mary Kidd worked with. So that was really nice to see that. Of course, if you go back and listen to the podcast that we had with Heel and Harrow, they tell you that they were very much inspired by the campaign and they got lots of help from the podcast. So that's really cool to see that. So we can see kind of ripple effects with things like that, which is really good, because the more things that people do and they create, the more people know about the campaign and the more we are satisfying our aims of the campaign.
Yeah, it's really lovely when I spoke to our speaker that we're going to hear today, and I spoke to her on Twitter, I think it was, and I was like, oh, I'm really excited to read this. And she was like, oh, I'm really excited because I was listening to your podcast. It's funny when you do something like a podcast, because essentially it's just you and I sitting online talking to one another. You don't really compute that other people are listening to it.
No, it's funny, isn't it? It's quite an odd thing that it seems like we're just, you know, that we're just talking to ourselves.
Away to ourselves, just
well, we know that we're not, you know, like we went down to Glasgow just the week before Christmas and did an event that was a film kind of a witch-related film festival. They invited us to come down and speak at that, and that was really interesting because, again, that's a totally different audience. So that's been really brilliant.
That was great just before Christmas there. So I'm really hoping that we have as many interesting things to do and events on in 2023.
I should actually mention, Claire, at this point, before we forget, on, I think it's the 27th of January, we're doing an event at the National Portrait Gallery in Edinburgh, where it's an event that's called, I think, Alt Burns, like as an alternative Rabbie Burns. And we're going to be talking about like his representations of witches, and I think probably looking at witches sort of generally in the culture. And that'll be really interesting. There's other speakers as well that are tackling that. So they're kind of, it's a bit like a Pecha Kucha maybe, but it's a bit longer. It's 15 minutes that everybody's got to speak at. That'll be really cool. And I presume tickets, if they're not available now, they will be soon from their website. So that's the National Portrait Gallery on the 27th of January.
Yeah, and we're also being invited down to Wigton in spring for a pre-book festival. I think it's a small festival on in spring. So we're invited down there as well, and we really look forward to that. If you know of anything which is happening in your local area, which is about the history of women killed as witches or anything like that, please do keep us in the loop and let us know about it. Lots of work's being done by Judith and Sean in the Forfar area. We also have the people who are running the Calder Witch Hunt, who are really fantastic and doing a lot of great work there. And yeah, just keep us updated with things that are going on so that we can tell people about it and promote it to folk that are listening. So do remember to get in contact. Usually best to get in contact with us via Twitter. That's probably the best route, I think, to get us as soon as possible. And one final thing we should say is we have contacted so many people to ask them if they would like to be on the podcast and discuss things with them. Zoe, we had written in our file of faxes a list of about 30 or 40 people, didn't we?
There's a lot of people. So I don't see us retiring the podcast anytime soon. So there are lots of, amazing people that are doing really cool work. And there's definitely some priorities. I really want to get Leo Igwe back on again to give us some updates. And we've got a really interesting guest from Malawi, and we've got various writers that have got books coming out that are to do with witches. And I think it's just sort of an endlessly fascinating topic that we know isn't showing any signs of slowing down. So that's cool. It's good. We've got lots of work to do.
We do. And Zoe, we forgot to say that we became doctors last year.
Oh, yes. Yes. That's how much dire straits the NHS is in. They're now drafting in podcasters to do surgery. No. We're anaesthetists. We put people to sleep. No, not that kind of doctor, you fool, Claire. No, not medical. No,
we are doctors of law. So the University of Dundee very kindly gave us doctors of law. And when we got the honorary degrees, in fact, we met someone else that was getting an honorary degree who is going to come and speak to us about witchcraft and about the modern day problem of climate change causing people to be accused of weather witchcraft. So we look forward to that being on the podcast later on. If we have said we'd like you to be on the podcast and we haven't got around to speaking to you, please don't be offended. It's just that there are so many people to get through and we record in batches. So hopefully all those people that we've spoken to, the 30 or 40 people, we are getting to you. And we're making a pledge about how often this podcast is coming out this year, aren't we, Zoe?
Yes, Claire, we are. We're going to do it every 2 weeks. Just for the benefit of listeners who can't see Claire at the moment, Claire is sitting in her house waving around a toasting fork, presumably because she's going to actually toast something on her. Presumably she's got an open fire going on. It's quite discomforting, Claire. I've got to be honest, when we're doing a podcast about witches and you're sitting there waving around what looks like a kind of either a pricking device or something to do with the devil.
It's probably not the best to have a small extendable toasting fork, but it does mean that I can make my point by jabbing at the camera screen, you see? Jab. It doesn't really work in a podcast though, does it?
Not really. But just know that she is waving around a toasting fork.
And know that as soon as I'm finished this podcast, I am going to toast a slightly elderly cinnamon scone.
So one last thing we need to mention though, in this roundup of the year, not just the last week or two, is that David, poor lovely David, has done, obviously, right, mental maths, 59 more episodes than he had in fact agreed to initially. So thank you so much again, David. Can I mention again that we are a team of two, Claire and me, who do this all for free and for love. But David is the one that's actually bringing technical skills to this, and he's also doing it for free and for love, which is obviously, it's not cool. It's sort of taking advantage of his good nature. So can I remind everybody again that we've got the merch that we sell, like the mugs and the hoodies and t-shirts and all that stuff. All that money just goes, the profit of that goes directly to David. We don't see any of it. It just goes to David. And also there's the buy me a coffee thing, I think, as well. So anything you can chuck towards David would be really kindly appreciated.
Yeah, in the new year, he's doing more of these podcasts, and it would be lovely if you do listen to this and just think, if you were to like meet him in a pub and he said, oh yeah, I'm the person that does, you'd go, oh, well, let me get you a drink. And so that's the same idea as buying someone a coffee. And it's not going to change finances much, but it's a nice mind if you have enjoyed the podcast, and we'd really appreciate that. Thanks very much.
I think that's
and also, it's really, really nice to meet people and to see people with merch. So if you have bought merch, and if, for example, product placement, you're using your mug or something like that, please do send us pictures of them on Twitter or on Insta and tag us in them so that we can retweet them and repost them on Insta so that we can show them to other people that might be interested in doing that.
Yeah, cool. I like that. Sounds good to me.
So thank you very much for sticking with us, ladies and gentlemen, since 2020. We're now, as Zoe says, 2023, and let's crack on with this week's podcast.
Okay, so the first episode this week then, Claire, you're going to give us a bit of an intro into what happened in Vardø.
Yes, and apologies if I'm not saying Vardø correctly, or indeed the names of the people involved. The information about those accused in Vardø, I'll just give you a broad idea of the witchcraft trials, because when we speak to our expert today, she goes into a lot more detail in it. But the witch trials of Vardø were held in Vardø, Finnmark in northern Norway in the winter of 1662 to 1663. And these trials were the biggest in Scandinavia. 30 women were put on trial, accused of sorcery and making pacts with the devil. One was sentenced to a workhouse, 2 were tortured to death, and 18 were burned alive at the stake.
Can I just interrupt there briefly, Claire? That's quite shocking, because we spend a lot of time, obviously, on the podcast saying in Scotland we didn't burn anybody at the stake. I mean, not that what we did was necessarily better, but they were strangled or they were hanged and then they were burned at the stake. But the fact that here in Vardø, that's actually what they did 18 times is just sort of beyond belief, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I'm hoping, Zoe, that Wikipedia, which is good, but it's not always infallible, we do see a lot of times repeated that women were burned at the stake in Scotland, and I'm maybe hoping that it's the same kind of thing, that people use the expression burning a witch at the stake, but actually they were executed first. So the caveat is this has not been researched by us directly as Wikipedia. So fingers crossed that Wiki has got that wrong. Okay. So the Vardø witch trials were the third of the 3 big mass trials of northern Norway, and it was, as I said before, one of the biggest trials in Norway. It was the peak of the witch hunt, which intensified in northern Norway since the first mass trial in 1621, and Vardø was at the very centre of this. About 140 witch trials were held in Finnmark in the 17th century between 1601 and 1692, and what's sometimes considered as the worst persecution in the times of peace in Norway, according to Rune Hagen. 91 people were condemned to death in these trials. The Steelsnet Memorial is dedicated to those women persecuted as witches. And we've said before that memorial by Louise Bourgeois and another architect whose name I can never remember is thank you, is one of the most beautiful examples of a memorial. And if you get an opportunity, either go there, Zoe and I want to go there in 2023, either go there or just Google the pictures and have a look around it, because it's a beautiful artistic memory of those killed as witches, and in fact has absolutely no statues of winsome-looking women staring out to sea.
I mean, that's absolutely what I'm thinking of when I'm thinking about what our national memorial could be like. Something as imaginative and as amazing and special as that one. I think it's the best one, and for my money. Anyway.
And we remember those people killed as witches in Vardø. They were simply women and men and not witches.
Okay, so our guest today is Anya Bergman, and her new novel, The Witches of Vardø. So the day that we're recording this is actually the publication date. So when this comes out in the next few days, it will be just hot on the shelves. So you'll be able to get it. I was in Waterstones Dundee today and I saw it in there. So it's definitely out and about in the shops. And it's inspired by the witch trials on the island of Vardø in Finnmark in the north of Norway during the 17th century. And in particular, the witch trials in the winter of 1662 to 1663. Anya first came across the witch trials of Vardø and the vivid folk tales of the north while she was living in Norway. She spent a number of years researching the trials while also travelling above the Arctic Circle to the Steel Nesset Memorial on the island of Vardø, in which Louise Bourgeois and Peter Zumthor commemorate those persecuted as witches. We might not realise it, but there are strong links between the history of witch trials in Scotland and Norway, as we will discuss, you'll hear in the following podcast. Anya is currently undertaking a PhD by published works at Edinburgh Napier University in Scotland, where she also tutors on the creative writing programme. And she also writes under the name Noelle Harrison and has had 13 novels previously published and been translated in over 12 different languages worldwide. So that's Anya's other writing sort of persona, which we're mentioning because we want to tell you that she's a really skilled and good writer. So this is a really interesting book and definitely worth you going out and getting. So without any further ado, welcome to the podcast, Anya Bergman. Hi there, Anya. I'm so pleased to welcome you to the Witches of Scotland podcast. It's nice to meet you.
Hello, lovely to meet you too as well.
Now, you're here to talk specifically, but we're not going to limit you to that if you've got other things to talk about your new book that's coming out. And I'm going to ask you, first of all, if you can tell us the name of the book and just a kind of an overview of what the book's about.
Absolutely. So the book is called The Witches of Vardø, and I apologise to any Norwegians if I've slightly mispronounced that. And it is inspired by and based on the real events of a series of witch hunts on the island of Vardø in the very, very far north of Norway. So it's as far north as you can go, really. And so I was very interested in this subject matter when I was living in Norway and began researching these trials actually about 10 years ago. And then I got completely obsessed, which I think does happen to quite a few of us when we start looking into the history of witch trials.
Yes. Oh, yes, it does.
Totally. So I really wanted to kind of raise the voices of these lost women. They were all women who were persecuted, and there were young girls persecuted as well. So I wrote a version of the novel a few years ago. I couldn't sell it. And then I actually turned it into a play and put it on as a play. And it was performed in Edinburgh just before lockdown hit, actually, in the Scottish Storytelling Centre. And it was during lockdown that I decided to adapt it back into a novel, and I completely changed the way I told the story. And I really went into a complete cave and wrote very intensely. And that's how the novel came about. And then, yes, it was picked up by a publisher, Manila Press. So that's the story behind writing it.
Oh, I'm so glad that they have, because we really look forward to reading it, and we understand it comes out in the new year. Is that right?
Yes, it's out on January the 5th. Although I have been told it might actually be in bookshops before Christmas. And Blackwell's are making it Book of the Month in January.
Oh,
so
how
Blackwell's
exciting.
in Edinburgh. Yes, I'm thrilled about that.
That's fantastic.
Well, keep us updated as to the dates so we can let listeners know on the socials and stuff.
Can you let us know a bit more about the story, or do you want to kind of keep that under your hat, or?
Oh, no, I can totally, I'm happy to talk about this all day. So, I mean, one of my challenges was I wanted to remain true to the history. I'm not writing fantasy here, I'm not. But at the same time, I found when I wrote a version of the book that was historically accurate, it was 500 pages long, and nobody could actually get through it. It was too much. As a novelist, I was trying to work out the way to tell this story, to activate the reader, but as well be true to the history of what happened to these persecuted women. So I brought in a theme of magic realism, and the way I used that was to use a sense, a kind of blurring. In some parts of the book, there's a blurring between what is real with what is possibly not real. But the purpose of that is to give the women agency, and to kind of liberate them from the trauma of that, of being colonized by the patriarchy at that time. So there was kind of purpose to that. But it is all based, I kind of had to whittle down, because the trials I'm writing about were in 1662. And at that time, I can't remember the exact number who were accused, but I do remember 20 women were executed for witchcraft, and 6 little girls, the youngest was the age of 8, were convicted of witchcraft and were to be executed. But fortunately, at this stage, there'd been intense witch trials the whole winter long on this island. The people of the island began to kind of go, oh, hang on a sec. They actually wrote a letter of complaint to the King of Denmark, because Norway was governed by Denmark at the time, kind of complaining about the fact that one of the women accused, Ingeborg Krug, had been tortured to death, and they had complained about that. So they then, the governor had to hold back a little bit. And so an appeal judge came from Copenhagen, and all the children were pardoned. Yeah, it was pretty, and it was really hard for us to believe this happened. But what is so fascinating about these trials in Finnmark, the region of Norway where this occurred is called Finnmark, is that all the trial records still exist. So there's one of my main resources was this book that Professor Liv Ellen Williamson, who I know you've talked about on the podcast before. So she had put together this book with all the original trial records, and they had been translated. And I actually also, when on one of my research trips, I interviewed Liv Ellen as well, and she's been giving me a lot of help with the novel.
What's the name of her book, just in case the readers...
I think it's called The Finnmark Witch Trials. You can buy it in English. I know the publisher is called Skald, which is Skald, and they actually have facsimiles of the original old Norwegian trial records and then the English translation. So you can actually see the names and all the testimony of those accused. So it's really interesting to read that testimony. And in particular, there's one character who features in my novel, but in my novel, I have them at an older age. They're like about 13, 14 in real history, called Maren Ulfsdatter. And she gives these colourful tales of her journey with the devil and her adventures with the devil. And the way she describes the devil is kind of quite a kindly, fun character compared to these kind of authoritarian figures that were on the island of Vardø at the time, the governor and his men.
How interesting they've invented somebody that's a more pleasant version of being a man.
Mm-hmm.
As like the most evil man. That's
quite interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely, because and the women as well, they would say, oh, the devil took us up to, there's a mountain across the straits from the island called Domen Mountain. And this was where the devil was supposed to reside. And in the caves was the entranceway to hell. And when I went there, one of my research trips, I actually found the caves to the entranceway to hell. I didn't go all the way, and I was like, ooh. But the women said we went up onto the mountain with the devil, and he played a red fiddle, and we danced, and we had beer, and Margaret Jonsdatter lost her shoe dancing with the devil, and they're just having a big hooly party with the devil. That's a crime, they're not supposed to drink beer and dance with the devil.
If it wasn't so utterly horrible and tragic, what you would take from all of this is the devil definitely throws a better class of party than other folk do.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I spoke to a lot of Norwegian friends as well when I lived there, and they were saying it was very looked down upon for women to drink beer as well at that time. And so even the fact they were drinking was, definitely the devil threw a better party.
So can I ask you, from all your researches, obviously we know that your novel will, as you say, have your narrative part of it, which is creative, but you've obviously done so much research on the people themselves. Now, We know that this particular outbreak and the trials were 1662, which was just after 1661, which was the biggest outbreak in Scotland. So about that time, really throughout Europe, there was an enormous amount of witchcraft accusations. Can you tell us, how did it start? Was there just one person arrested? Was there a story? Was there a spate? What kicked everything off?
Well, what kicked off on the island of Vardø was it was a Scotsman. Scotland exported witch hunts to Norway. I'm afraid that occurred before. In 1619, I think it was around 1619, was the first witch trials on the island of Vardø, and the King of Denmark, Christian, I think it was the fourth. He was the brother-in-law of James VI. And Christian IV was pretty obsessed with witches and thought he'd be, he had a lot of physical ailments and he blamed it on being cursed by a witch. And he felt he had a big witch problem in the north. I have this witch problem in the north of Norway, one of my kingdoms. And so he asked James, got any advice or can you help me out here? And he go, I've got a great fella now. I'll send over from Scotland to be governor of Vardø. And so he kicked off the first witch panic, you could say, or I don't really like that term, witch panic, but the first series of witch hunts on the island of Vardø. And actually the first people to be accused were Sami men who refused to pay their taxes and Sami shamans. So there was a few of those accused, but then it quickly became more Norwegian women, the wives of fishermen. And there was an economic reason for that, which I can tell you about in a second. But just coming back to the 1661, I do think the reason that was so virulent in the whole of Europe was connected to the growth of ideas in demonology. So these particular trials in Vardø have been this particular series of trials have been blamed on a Danish woman and her husband she was called Anna Rudius, who was exiled to the island of Vardø from Denmark for being basically a pain in the ass, kind of mouthy, middle-aged woman who wouldn't shut up.
I don't know any of those.
Awesome dame.
She was clearly very clever, and she wouldn't shut up about corruption. She was in Christiania, or modern day Oslo, with her husband. And so anyway, she ended up exiled to Vardø, and she's been blamed for stoking the witch trials. And it's kind of been a story that's been told throughout history. And I decided to look at that again. I thought, it's all very convenient to blame Anna Rudius for the witch panic. But she and her husband they were very learned. They had the biggest library in the whole of Norway. So she would have been very learned in demonology.
She was the one that was kind of blamed culturally over time. So do people still now sort of think of her as being the kind of the...
Yes, definitely. And even in my play, I kind of blamed her. And then when I wrote the novel, I thought, now hang on a sec, I'm just believing those 19th century male historians. And they called her they said she had litigation fever, that she was obsessed with taking legal action against men in authority and kept sending petitions to the king. And in the end, he just got absolutely fed up with her and exiled her along with her husband. And my novel, I've kind of taken the husband out of it because I just wanted to focus on her. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. So I decided to have a menopausal protagonist because she is menopausal. And I thought, you don't get enough of those.
I just started reading the book today, and she talks about hot flushes. Obviously, she doesn't call it that. And I was like, I hear you, babe.
Yeah.
She goes and opens the window and she lets the cold air against her skin. I was like, plus ça change for women.
Absolutely.
Always the same.
Yeah. And I kind of feel that she gets a bad rap of it. There's a whole kind of trial in 1666 when she's, her husband is trying to get her pardoned because he gets pardoned in 1666, but she never gets pardoned and she remains there for the rest of her life. And, the authorities on the island are going, no, she's basically, I can't remember the exact terminology, but she's a harridan. Her diatribes are driving us mad, and they just blame her for everything. And the governor of Vardø at that time, he wasn't the Scotsman now, it was another man, and Christopher Orning was his name. And he blamed her. He obviously got into a lot of trouble because he was going to burn little girls, but he blamed her. What was awful about this trial was the children, the little girls, were convinced to testify against their own mothers, which was awful,
So when you say that she was blamed, do you mean that people saw her as being like the original witch? Or did she just whip things up? Or, what is it that she's supposedly done to start this all off?
Well, they basically said she persuaded the little girls to testify against their mothers. So because where the women were held in captivity on the island, there was a place called the Witches' Hole. It wasn't actually a hole, it was like a little wee turf hut, but it had no windows, and they were all crammed in there, and you'd have over 20 women in there, and there wasn't room for the girls. So they put the girls in Anna Rudius's prison, which was this longhouse. So the girls were lodging with her, and then they said she influenced the girls to testify against the mothers. And she had Anna had a key to the Witches' Hole, but she also a couple of the women were pregnant, and she had midwifery skills, so she went in and she helped with them giving birth. And her grandfather had been physician to the King of Denmark, so I have it that I kind of assume she had a certain level of knowledge, medical knowledge, but she was never accused of witchcraft herself. But I think that she was probably under danger of that because she was a middle-aged woman in the wrong place at the wrong time with healing skills. So maybe she was, we don't quite know what went on, but
trying to divert attention, possibly.
Possibly. But I'm not sure if she did manipulate the children. I'm not sure. All the written records about her and all the historical texts about her are written by male historians, and the guy writing down the court transcripts is in the employ of the governor. So
was there one event that kicked off this 1661 event? And if so, what was that?
Yes. So a few of the trials that have been going on were very much connected to relations between the fishermen, the Norwegian fishermen, and the Bergen merchants. So the fishermen from the island of Vardø and their relationship with the merchants who came up from Bergen, and kind of they lived in the nice houses and all the fishermen lived in little turf huts. So what was going on was there was arguments breaking out because the mini ice age had kind of affected the fishing halls. So in fact, during the Middle Ages, this was actually quite a wealthy part of Europe because it was such a rich area for fishing. So what would happen would be the Norwegian fishermen would trade their load of fish for grain with the Bergen merchants. But because the fish were going further south and the hauls were getting smaller and smaller, they were owing the merchants more and more money. And then when they started complaining, the merchants would accuse one of their wives of witchcraft. So this is what had happened. This is what triggered the 1661 trial. Was a woman called Doretta Loretsdatter. She had been accused a few years before because the husband had complained about this debt with the merchant, and then the merchant, lo and behold, said, your wife's a witch. She managed to kind of get off that time, but then it happened again. And I think there was some row over they were trying to steal some servant, and then the servant got sick, the servant that worked for the merchant or something like that. These little details aren't actually in my novel, but that's what triggered the 1661 event. So when poor Doretta was taken in chains, most of the women accused were from the villages on the Varanger Peninsula, and then they were taken across by boat to the island and the fortress, and then she would have been tortured, and then she denounced someone else, and then there you go. Then it started accumulating.
And did the same thing happen as it happened elsewhere? Someone would confess to being a witch, and then they would be asked whether or not they were witches with anyone else, and then in their state of delirium or whatever would name other people they knew, and then those people would be brought in and the whole process would start again.
Yes, and I'm afraid they were more vicious on the island of Vardø. The methods of torture were really awful. So you cannot have any judgment on anyone who was put through that. And yes, they were tortured until they named others. But the woman I mentioned earlier, Ingeborg Krug, who was tortured to death, she was quite phenomenal because she refused to name another woman. And she said, she's quoted as saying in the trial records, I will not tell a lie on any other woman or myself. And she was tortured to death. So,
that's incredible strength, just almost superhuman strength that someone would go through that and just not for the sake of stopping physical pain or mental pain, just see an aim.
Totally. I don't know how she withstood it. Yeah. And even though like legally, in Denmark at that time, you were not supposed to torture a witch or someone accused of witchcraft until they had confessed. And then you could torture them for other names, but they were torturing them to get them to confess.
That's interesting. So once you had confessed to being a witch, the authorities would then be allowed to say, well, she's now confessed, so torture is admissible. We will allow torture to be used to obtain the other names.
Absolutely, yeah.
Whereas in Scotland, they said torture isn't admissible at all, but for two reasons that didn't work. One, the people that were saying that were in Edinburgh and couldn't really control what was happening in the rest of the country. So they couldn't make sure no one was being tortured. And two, they didn't consider keeping people awake for days on end was torture. So the people were being tortured. It was just that we didn't understand the calling of it as torture.
Yeah, I mean, that is a terrible torture. And I'm not sure if they did the sleep deprivation. I did kind of include it in the novel because I have a Scottish character kind of inspired by that original Scottish witch hunter. But they did that. What was common was they did do the water ordeal up in those freezing Arctic waters. Yeah.
So they did the dunking. If you sunk, you were good, and if you floated, you were a witch.
Yeah. So they would kind of truss them up and row out, and then they'd have a pole with a hook. So they would kind of throw the woman into the sea, and then if she floated, they'd hook her out. But she always did float. It would say in the records, and she floated like a bob, because like they'd be so cold, and the shift would billow up, and they'd be full of air, and they would always float, you know?
Yeah, I mean, humans do float, not very well and not very successfully, but they do float at least for some time. They've air in their lungs, and so presumably they would immediately float
You've
up.
got to wonder at what point where a committee gets together and they go, right, how are we going to test if these women are witches? And
I like the idea you've got a committee there, Zoe.
Why don't we, hear me out, why don't we throw them in a body of water and see what happens? Why don't we try that? Like at some point, somebody had that idea.
But do you remember why it was? The theory was that when you are baptized, you're baptized in water, and therefore, if you were thrown in water, God's water would envelop you and take you in as its own. But if you were a witch, God's water would expel you from the water, and that's why you go up. That's the committee.
I'm not a qualified lawyer, okay? I'm not. I'm going to speak as if I am, though. The story is full of holes, right? Water it's not holy water they're throwing them into. It's just regular water. It's just
I guess it's considered sacred. Water is considered sacred, and it's the same reason why they burned them at the stake, because in Norway as well, they weren't. This is a very dark conversation, but they weren't strangled first. They were burned at the stake.
Yeah. Oh.
They were tied to ladders, and they built up the fires, and that they lowered them into the fire attached to a ladder, so they would, they would definitely burn alive. And the idea was, it was like, oh, we're doing you a favor. We're cleansing you of sin. We're making sure you have your best chance not to go to hell by burning you at the stake.
The discussions we've had around the reasons for them burning them in Scotland seems to be the academics you've spoken to in Scotland have said it was so there was no body left, so that the devil couldn't reanimate them. So it's interesting. It's really curious. I'm reading a book called Everyone Knows Your Mother is a Witch just now by Reva Galchen. So it's an American book, but it's set in Germany, and it's like dealing with like the German witch trials. It's a really funny book, actually. It doesn't sound like it'd be funny, but it is funny. I don't know if you're familiar with the book Olive Kittredge, but she's a really unpleasant character. She's a woman just going about her business, and she doesn't give a shit. And this is what the woman is like, and that's why she's accused of being a witch. And so they talk in that one about burning them at the stake. And one woman says to her, oh, I heard that in the recent ones that they did, they tied gunpowder around her neck as a kindness. And we've heard academics talking about that it was a kindness that the gunpowder would blow up immediately before they actually burned to death themselves. It's just like, again, people sat and went, well, what's the best way to do this? What are we going to do? And somebody said, yeah, that's a good idea. And somebody else went, yeah, that's a great idea. And then they went ahead and did it. It's just remarkable to me. We sort of joke about it being committees. But it is committees.
Yeah, it would
committees
be.
of men that are sitting with the Bible or sitting with legal books that are saying, right, this is the way we're going to deal with this problem. It's just completely bananas.
I mean, I think that they considered, like, when I was looking at some of the terminology in the trial records, as you're saying, I could trying to get my head around the state of mind of the society. And the way that the governor of Vardø talks about the witches, for me, it was very reminiscent of how world leaders talked about the war on terror. Do you know what I mean? It was like they viewed witches as terrorists. And even he's saying, the governor of Vardø is saying, they've threatened to blow up the fortress. They are going to get to the King of Denmark and destroy him. So they felt they were on a war against terror. They genuinely thought that, you know. So.
What were these women accused of then? So you're mentioning that they threatened to blow up the king. Had anybody threatened to blow up the king, or
no?
This was on the basis of what like people's confessions, or they must have been accused of something first before they got to the confession state, I suppose. So what were they accused of?
Well, they were blamed for the fishing yields being low.
Right,
so he said so-and-so was seen with legs of seaweed chasing the fish away, running along the beach.
Legs of seaweed.
That was a common one. Legs of seaweed, running along the beach, chasing the fish. Another very common one, of course, was there would have been a lot of, you know, hazardous journeys and ships going down. So if a merchant's ship went down, then they were accused of weather magic. They were also accused a lot of the time of turning into other animals. So they were accused of turning into birds. And so let's say, you know, Maren Sigvildsdatter and Margaret Jonsdatter were accused of turning into a crow and a swan, and they were seen sitting on the mast of this ship, and then the ship sank and they killed all the people on board, you know, because they turned into birds. And actually, I was quite interested. The bird theme is very big up in Vardø. They're always being accused of turning into these birds that cast bad magic, bad spells. And then when I was up there in the summer with the 24 hours daylight, you can't sleep for the unending screech of seabirds. And I thought, oh, right, okay. I got why they were so, you know, and it was like screaming women in a way, or you could say.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And it would drive you a bit mad. What time of the year did it all kick off? Was it during the really long sunlight, or was it in the depths of winter?
It was in the depths of winter, in the dark, dark winter. Yeah, I mean, you can see it time and time again. The trials happen in the winter.
You know, I made a kind of a sort of a joke, but it's not a joke about, you and I met the other week when we were doing Marry Kids launch in Edinburgh at the Portobello Bookshop. And I said, why is Scotland, you know, so involved and so good in this? Is it because the winter is really grim and people had nothing to entertain themselves? And then this was something tremendously exciting. I mean, it must have been, if you were on the side of good, then the people must have thought, you know, if you're saying there, you know, they were really fighting against terror and they were saving people's lives, and people would have that very high level of drama, I think, that they were on the side of good and that they were doing a wonderful thing. You have to wonder if it was more temperate, if things would have gone that way. You know, I think people were grim and depressed, and that's got to be partially why these accusations were so big in cold, crummy countries.
I don't know. I think as regards Vardø, I mean, because it's so far north, it's above the Arctic Circle. So we're talking about a place of physical extremity, you know, and so you have really wild animals up there like wolves and lynx and bears, and you have extreme weather conditions and blizzards. And then you have the Aurora Borealis, which people were frightened of, the Christian people, not the Sami people who revered them. They thought they were spectrals from the devil. And also traditionally, it was believed that witches came from the north, that the devil's kingdom was, you know, once you went as far as you could go north, you got to hell, you know.
How interesting to have the devil being in the frozen north. I immediately associate the devil with heat and warmth.
The idea is that you go into his mountain, and then this little girl, Maren Olufsdatter, I mean, her story is quite, if it wasn't so awful, it's actually quite jolly, kind of her jolly story of how the devil leads her into the heart of the mountain, into this valley and there's a boiling lake with all the people screaming, and then he gets a leg of ham and he cooks it for her in the boiling lake, and they eat ham together. But yeah, it's a hot inside the earth, but yeah, the outside is freezing cold and snowy. And
so he hides in a snowy lair, a bit like a Bond villain, and burrows underneath the earth.
I do think the Christians I think we have to mention the Sami, because the Christian society viewed the Sami as in league with the devil as well. And that, I don't know if you know anything about Sami culture. It's so fascinating. And so they have part of their mythology, or part of their religion, they would have a shaman who plays a drum with lots of symbols on it, and then he goes into a trance. I'm probably not explaining this. I'm explaining this too simply, but he basically goes into a trance and can astrally project. But people at that time believed that the Sami could spellcast, and so merchants would actually buy spells off them called guns to kind of shoot at their enemies. And also the Sami tradition of yoiking, which is when they kind of do this very special kind of singing. They would say they were the sounds of the devil and things like this. So the Sami culture is all entwined. And actually the last person accused of witchcraft and who died while imprisoned was a Sami man. And they still have his runebum, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but his special drum with the symbols. That's I think it's in a museum in Norway. I can't remember exactly where in Norway, but yeah, it still exists.
So were they seen as being, like the same way in Scotland, we'd see people as being charmers, so initially it's not bad. It's not like a bad thing that they're doing. It's something that people will sort of at some point have tapped into as kind of folk magic, that it was helpful to them to kind of live on the land and so on and so forth. And then at some point that turned, or were people always suspicious of the Sami?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, I know they did integrate with the community because they did intermarry. The Norwegian women who were accused of witchcraft consider themselves Christians, and I don't think they would have followed Sami religion. I think the Samis that integrated became Christians rather than the other way around.
Right, okay.
I'm not 100% sure though, but yeah, so I don't think it was viewed as folk magic or folk healing that they would use.
After the witch trials finished, was there anything close in time after that to say, we're sorry, we realised we got it wrong? Or did they have to wait hundreds of years for the beautiful memorial that now exists?
I think they had to wait hundreds of years, but again, I'm not completely sure. But I mean, that memorial is astounding. And I feel very passionately that Scotland needs something like that.
I'd like to see something like that, something that's just really unusual and striking and amazing.
Can you describe it to
Yes, I've been twice. I've been once in the winter and once in the summer. So the winter time was the most powerful. So there's two parts to it. So one part designed by a Swiss architect called Peter Zumthor, and it looks like it's based on these Norwegian fishing racks. So in the culture, the fishermen would have these kind of racks that they would hang their dried fish on, which they would then sell. So from the outside, it looks like these giant dried fishing racks, and it's right on the edge of the peninsula, right where the women would have been executed. And you open a door and you go inside, and it's this very narrow, dark corridor, and it's only lit by light bulbs that are all at different heights. And as you walk down, on the walls is the story of every single person who was executed. So in total, during 100 years, I think there was 110 executed. I could have that figure wrong, which was a lot for a population of 3,000.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
All the stories are down, and Professor Liv Ellen Williamson wrote those stories. So you go down this, and when I went in, the wind is blowing, so it's kind of it's shaking, and it's very powerful. And then you come out of that, and you walk across to this installation, this little building that Louise, and I'm going to pronounce her surname wrong. Is it
Bourgeois?
Louise Bourgeois made. It was her last commission. And she
was it? I didn't know that.
That's
even more amazing.
And she was like, I'm doing that. And you walk in, and it's like these giant mirrors all around you in a circle, and you see yourself reflected in them, a little bit like Alice in Wonderland. And then there's a chair in the center with this flame burning. So what you see is yourself in the flames. It's really intense.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I think, Zoe, we need to go.
We have to.
Yeah.
That's one, actually. I mean, I'd love to go to Salem. I think it'd be really interesting to go to Salem, but I really, really, really want to go first to the Norwegian one. I just think from the beginning, that was the most striking to me, because they've got, I think, such a parallel to us. I don't know if it's just for the people that don't know what I look like. I'm blonde-haired and blue-eyed and pale-skinned. So I've always thought
She looks Scandinavian.
I feel Scandi in my soul. And when I went once to Denmark, I was like, I feel like these might be sort of my people. You know, I felt kind of like, you know, there's no evidence in my family in the recent, you know, bits of the tree that we've done of our family that we are Scandinavian, but I hold on to that feeling in my heart. So I feel like that's somewhere I'd really like to go. And I just, you know, there's so many similarities. It's different, obviously, in lots of ways, because it's specific to what you're saying about fishing, and then with the Sami culture and so on. There's different aspects to it. But just this idea about life being hard and people being really fixated and dogmatic about, you know, doing God's work, you know, and it just is so fascinating to me. And I'm already a huge fan of Louise Bourgeois' artwork. So to go and see something like that, I think she was such a brilliant and inspired choice of artist to take for it. I always forget the man's name.
Peter Zumthor. Yeah.
Peter Zumthor, right?
I think that's right. And it was, I mean, the Queen of Norway was very much involved in that project and very much behind it. Yeah, I mean, the Norwegian people are very proud of it, and they should be. It's a huge acknowledgement of what happened. And it is, when you go there, when you go to Vardø, it's not hard to imagine what, you know, it's such an extreme place and so remote.
It can't have changed much.
No, it hasn't changed much. So really put your feet in their shoes. I've been to Salem as well, a different experience. And it's quite interesting, because I was a little bit, when I was going there, I was like, oh, is this going to feel like, you know, a bit tacky? They've made it into a theme park. And when I went there, I actually loved it. Obviously, you get the history, but you don't feel like you do in Vardø, that you're actually going back in time. However, it felt like a celebration of all those different, you know, when you're getting the train to Salem, there's people sitting there with pointy hats. So there's people who identify as different from your mainstream American culture. And I thought, well, that's okay, you know, that's good.
And that's something that we sort of, you know, we discuss, and that comes up and that we talk about a lot. Whenever Claire and I do events, we always say to people, we ourselves are not witches. We completely support anybody's idea of what they want to identify as. And if you're a witch, a modern day witch, that's totally cool with us. And we have the support of lots of modern day witches, obviously. Well, maybe not obviously, but we have the support of lots of modern day witches. But we're always at pains to say to people, but these women in Scotland were not witches. You know, there might have been one or two or some that saw themselves as practicing magic, but they weren't witches in the construct legally that they were accused of and often executed for being.
Yeah, I think that's the huge difference about it. What was the name of the last event you went to, Zoe? What was it called? We Are All Witches.
Right. She's talking about, listeners, when I went to Mary Kidd's book launch, which is where I met Anya, her book is called We Are All Witches. But Mary is very much making the point that we are all witches in the sense that none of these women were witches, and that we're all precarious, and that any of these ordinary people, ordinary women for the most part, could be accused. Therefore, any of us could be accused.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. I'm only kidding on with you. But it was Mary that in fact said right at the very, very start a phrase that I remember when she said, the history of witches in Scotland is the history of women in Scotland. And that really struck me, that's such an amazing way to have looked at our history, as we have to look at it through these accusations.
I mean, certainly there were no Norwegian men or Danish men accused of witchcraft.
Oh, really?
No, it was all, it was predominantly Norwegian women, and they were younger there as well. They were mothers with young daughters. Yeah, which is quite interesting.
Was there anything that you discovered during your research that was surprising to you that you hadn't anticipated?
I guess I had that opinion, like most people, that lots of midwives and healers and cunning women were accused. I thought that's what it was going to be, and it wasn't that at all. It was just regular people who were really poor and trying to survive. And then when they tried to stand up for themselves, this is what happened.
I think that's something that I'm really, really pleased about our campaign, is that I think that that's one of the things that we've been able to redress a bit, is that story, because it's an alluring story, isn't it? To think that these were women that were standing up against the man, and that they had this ancient knowledge that men didn't like. But I think that really it does the women that were accused a disservice, because it obscures the truth, and I'm all about the truth historically. So I think that it's great to see the change in that, and to also see now, I would say in the last year or two, I'm not saying it's directly about our campaign, but I think it is, that now witches is always in speech marks, and it didn't used to be. Like, you would, people wouldn't even have questioned it. And I think there was this idea that these women were witches, that they had done something to deserve it in some way, even if people didn't say that out loud. So I think the fact that now people are able to kind of say, well, these were, like you're saying, these were often poor people that were just trying to survive, and they got caught up in a ridiculous idea that had taken hold of their country, is really fascinating.
I mean, I would say there is, and it's something that I pick on in my novel because I think it's quite interesting for the reader to explore. There were cases of women who kind of said, actually, I do have that power, but their motivation was to kind of protect themselves. So there was a case of a woman down in Bergen called Anya Bergman, and she was an older woman. They kept accusing her of different things, and she just kind of joked about it, and she said, yes, I can kill kids, and she was trying to protect herself, but it backfired.
So they'd leave her alone if they persisted with accusing her, that she would then do bad magic to them, sort of thing.
Yes, kind of a protection. It was kind of a way, because they and I thought about that in the writing of the book. So there is this girl Maren Ulfsdatter who does say all these things that she did. I do have her kind of claiming a sense of power, because it's a way of protecting herself, or a way of giving herself and the other women some agency.
Margaret Atwood wrote a fantastic poem about that very thing called Half-Hanged Mary. If you haven't read Half-Hanged Mary, dear listener, please go and do it. It's absolutely amazing. What happens is it takes an innocent woman and she's hanged for witchcraft. And it's based on a true story of a woman called Mary Webster, who was accused and hanged as a witch, but they didn't get the hanging right. And she hung from her neck, but survived overnight. And Margaret Atwood heard this story and then does the poem as Mary herself. And the story that she tells of Mary is of Mary hanging there overnight, and them taking her down, her still being alive, and her saying, I wasn't a witch when you put me up there, but I certainly am now. And the story is that woman lived out her life, because they couldn't hang her for witchcraft again. She lived out her life, and although I would love to think that she lived out her life happily, I imagine people were just very scared of her and socially isolated her. But it's that great idea of when you have nothing else left to say, yes, I have got all the power, that you attribute to me.
I think that's why some of the cases, there's a case that actually I'm mentoring a writer who's writing about Elspeth Rioch on Orkney, and she confessed without being tortured, I believe. But I think she'd had such an awful life that it was her first chance of having agency over her life,
Absolutely. There also is the prospect that if you know exactly what's going to happen to you, some people just go, I'm a witch. Okay, I'm a witch. Because you think, do I want to be tortured and then killed, or just killed?
Yeah.
So we know that your book takes place all around this period. We know that you have obviously one or two protagonists. Is there somebody who is your favourite in the book that you want to tell us about?
Well, I love Maren. The story is told from two different points of view. So I also love Anna Rudis in a strange way, even though she's in inverted commas, a baddie. Part of the book is told from her point of view in letters to the king, who has exiled her to Vardø. And she goes through quite an interesting journey through the novel. And then the other narrative is from the point of view of Ingeborg Iverstadt, the daughter of a woman accused of witchcraft. But her kind of her helper is Maren Ulfsdatter, and she's just such a unapologetic, feisty young woman. Yeah, I just love her personality. And you think when you read the book, you're thinking, oh my God, she's definitely going to get taken down. But I don't want to
spoilers. No spoilers.
Don't give any spoilers there.
No spoilers. No spoilers.
And just one very last thing, and we've taken up so much of your time, and we're so grateful for you speaking to us. One thing that obviously all the way through this is the women take their mother's name and not their father's name. It's always the daughter of. We've spoken about that in earlier episodes. Was that for Norway?
It's the daughter of the father. So let's say, yeah. So I think it's slightly different for Iceland. Is it? Yeah, I'm not sure about Iceland, but so it would be Ingeborg Ivarsdatter, and her father would be called Ivar.
Okay, so they still
Olafsdatter, her father would be Olaf. Yeah.
Oh, so they still managed to. Oh, damn it! I thought it was true, because we spoke before about how I would be Claire Delia's daughter. I think that's quite a nice name. Sorry, Dad. I'm not sure if Dad's listening, to be honest. It's probably not his thing.
What's your dad's first name?
James.
It'll be James' daughter.
James.
Mine would be David's daughter. I'd rather no.
The female names are more exciting, aren't they? So, but yeah, I'm afraid it was after, so which was quite helpful in terms of researching who was related to who, because I could see by looking at first names. Most of the women accused were from the same series of villages on the Varangia Peninsula, so from a village called Vardø, Ekerøy, and those were the two main villages actually, and Kiberg, so they all knew each other and were kind of cousins and aunts and sisters and daughters.
Can I ask one more question? Have you had any feedback from your Norwegian friends about the book, or have any of them read it yet?
Yeah, they love it. They love it. They've been a champion of it since I first started working on it, so they're really excited. And it's quite nerve-wracking writing about a place you're not from, but I did live there for 6 years, so I felt I could, and I felt it was a very important story to tell. And actually, one of the things that Professor Liv-Helene Williamson said to me, and gosh, I really hope she likes the novel. I'm really stressed she might not, but she did say to me, she said, please raise the voices of the women with tenderness. And that's kind of been my motto the whole way through.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
From what I've read so far, I've got a sneak preview that I have to read and then pass along to Claire. I think you've definitely done that. I'm already completely hooked into it. It's fantastic so far. And what a perfect time of the year to be reading it. So at least these days we can sit in and read an amazing gripping yarn instead of going out and accusing women in our village of being witches. So things have moved on quite nicely. It's good.
So thank you so very much for coming to speak to us, Anya. We really appreciate it, and we really look forward to having a read of your book.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've loved talking to you both, and I just believe so passionately in this campaign. So
thank you. It's really good. I think it's just wonderful to read these. As a writer myself, I love reading these fictionalized versions of what life was like, because it's the clearest way of, as you said earlier, putting your feet in somebody else's shoes, and seeing what life was like, and then making that connection. These were real people with real lives. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this, the 65th episode of the podcast, The Witches of Scotland. We hope you've enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed recording it and talking to Anya. We will, of course, be back in 2 weeks with another episode. We are contactable on our social media. Probably, as Claire said at the beginning, the best place to get us is probably on Twitter, because we tend to be on there more frequently. But we're also on Instagram and on Facebook and on TikTok.
TikTok, I feel, is the year for us on TikTok, Zoe. We've only done 2 TikToks so far, and they've been well received, inverted commas, and bunny rabbit ear well received quotations there. I'm not sure if people talk about TikToks being well received. It's more really about clicks, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
Our TikToks
Who knows?
very well received.
Maybe this year we will make a TikTok, but I don't know. I don't think so. Anyway.
I am definitely going to make more TikToks. It's whether or not I can persuade you into one, or just sneak doing. There's a lot of raccoons on TikTok, Zoe.
Yeah, but we'll see. We'll see about that.
If you cannot persuade her onto TikTok because of the raccoon content, then there's probably no chance of getting there. She's saying no.
Little chance altogether. Never mind. So we look forward to hearing from you. Please get in touch with us if you've got anything you'd like us to promote or inform people about that you're doing that's to do with the witch trials. Get in touch with us if you've got any pictures of yourself in your merch. That's always nice to see. And please do get in touch with us. It's nice to hear from you.
Yeah, also get in touch with us if you've got any photographs of yourself and raccoons. I would love that.
I would quite love that. Yeah, that'd be quite cool.
Happy 2023.
Woohoo!
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.